is Dr. Vikki Park, who I have the pleasure of introducing today. And I met Vikki quite a few years ago now, and we probably started properly discussing all things parents and carers at around the pandemic. And we had lots of chats virtually, and then we finally got to meet. It was actually not that long ago that we met in person. It was kind of bizarre, really, a symptom of COVID-19. But I've always been incredibly impressed with Vikki as a person, and really value everything that she brought to the Northumbria University network, and just generally the enthusiasm and the contribution of thoughts and ideas. So yeah, she's someone that I'm really pleased to be able to welcome on this topic in particular. I've been aware of this topic with Vikki for a while. So just to briefly take you through her blurb. So Vikki has a 26-year career spent in nursing, education, and the charitable sector. In this webinar, she's going to draw on her lived experience of caring for her father at the end of life. So while simultaneously negotiating several roles and identities as a mother, a wife, sister, daughter, nurse, academic, and unbelievably a PhD student as well. So this is thinking about the role of universities to support staff who are carers will be explored, and with reflection on the ways that networks can support academic staff with caring responsibilities. So I will happily pass over to Vikki now. I'll stop sharing my slides and allow Vikki to share hers. So welcome, Vikki.
Thanks for that, Mark. That was a lovely introduction. A little bit embarrassed there, just as well you can't see the red cheeks down the screen. Are you able to see the screen okay? Has that translated over? Right,
Yes.
fingers crossed the bandwidth actually holds then, because it's great fun when you're at home. So hi everybody, thanks for joining me over lunch today. It really is a privilege to join you today on this important topic. And this is actually the first time I've spoken about this in a large public forum. So previously it's been discussing this topic on a more personal level and in a more discreet way with small groups of people, through advocacy roles and through parent carer networks. So this is a first for me. So thank you for inviting me along to speak on this large platform. So yeah, living with dying. So I will be sharing with you today my lived experience of caring for my father and keeping all the plates spinning, ultimately, whilst working in academia and juggling everything. And I think what I'm really hoping to get to in terms of a point of discussion is to get to the point where I'm going to give you an oversight of what the experience looked like for me personally. So you're going to get an insight to my journey. And hopefully where we'll get to at the end of that is the role that universities play, and also the role that networks can actually have in supporting people like myself and others who go through this journey. And so that's the space I would like to land on when I get to the end of the talk. So I think one of the things that we've spoken about even before we pressed record was what a big issue this actually is. So I'm old enough to remember that this statistic used to be 1 in 3 people who had cancer, and now it's 1 in 2. So the prevalence of cancer, 1 in 2 people's lives will be affected by cancer. It means that if you don't get cancer, then I might. So this is quite a startling statistic when we look at this. And I think what it means is the majority of us at some point are going to be touched by this in one way, shape or another, whether that's individually or whether that's somebody that we care about or somebody we're supporting, whatever that may be. So I think that just really highlights the prominence of this situation and why it is important to bring it to the table, because it affects so many people. So it's been a very reflective process, this, by the way. It's been very cathartic, casting back over time with a very methodical lens and looking back through and piecing together my journey. So that's what I'm going to walk you through essentially. And I think it's fair to say that the first space you'll find yourself in, if this ever happens to you, is a space of survival. And you need to learn how to live with dying and the prospect of what is to come. But actually, the next stage from that is end of life. And then beyond that, there's a period of recovery, And for myself personally, I then moved into a period of advocacy. And so I'm going to give you some oversight into my journey to help to lift the lid on this subject that a lot of people don't talk about. And that's hopefully what I'm going to get into today. So my story really starts back in 2011, which is when I first moved into higher education as a nurse and academic. A year later, 2012, I enrolled onto my PhD study and I was pregnant with my second child. So all of that was happening in 2012. And as we progressed, I then ended up having to shift into this survival mode because whilst I should have been taking my baby to baby massage classes, I should have been walking out with a pram in the spring and admiring the flowers, I actually ended up spending a large proportion of my time driving to hospitals, in hospital waiting rooms, because my father was diagnosed quite early on, and my daughter was only about 3 months old at this point. So during my maternity leave, which to be fair to my dad was very kindly timed because I was off work, so to speak, so I was able to actually spend time with him and my mum at the time. So my dad was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And we had a double barrel. So the double barreled news was, do you want the bad news or do you want the really bad news? So the bad news was they found one kidney. He only had one and we didn't know. The really bad news was he had a very large tumour on that one kidney that he did have. And what that meant for us as a family was the news that we received on that day was it was inoperable. It couldn't be treated by radiotherapy and it couldn't be treated by chemotherapy either. So it was quite a blow to actually receive. So that was in 2013. Hence, there's one kidney on there, not two, because he only had one. And so from that point, really, we moved into this survival mode. And for 4.5 years, as a family, we lived with cancer, and that was our lived journey as a family unit. And that involved for myself juggling multiple identities and multiple roles, keeping all of these plates spinning throughout this 4.5 year period. And I think what was really good for me to think about is how many ways did I split myself? If I could have cloned myself, that would have been ideal. And in terms of multiple identities, that's my dad there on my wedding day. So in terms of multiple identities, I was a daughter, and my parents tried to keep me in that role for as long as I could. I wasn't alone, I had a sibling. So that's half of my bro's face. I'm just trying to kind of protect his confidentiality. So I'm a sister. I'm also a wife, a mother, um, an academic. That's me teaching nursing students. I'm a nurse academic by trade, but additionally had enrolled onto my PhD the year prior to Dad being diagnosed with cancer. So this is an awful lot of plates really to be juggling and navigating. And over that long period of time, there were things that I did to try and manage the stresses. So, for example, I did drop to part-time working to try and manage a lot of the things that were happening. Um, I did seek out bereavement counselling at the point of diagnosis, which was within the hospital, and that was a very, very useful thing for me personally. Even though my dad had just been diagnosed, to seek out that support was absolutely invaluable going forward. And then all of the other networks that wrap around the edges in life. And it was 2017 when dad deteriorated. And the comment about Superwoman, you might notice the infographic with the Superwoman down the bottom. We used humour as a coping mechanism, good old gallows humour. And as part of that, one of the things that I had done is I had bought a Superwoman t-shirt, a Wonder Woman. I had a Wonder Woman t-shirt and a Superwoman t-shirt. Um, and so we really drew on our humour to kind of keep ourselves going along. And the plan had been for my dad to die in a hospice. Unfortunately, we had to discharge him from that environment. And really, I think at that point, I was stripped of the privilege of being a grieving daughter. And I actually flipped into nurse mode and led my dad's end of life care myself. So dad came back to the family home and he actually died at home, which was not the original plan. So in the 2 weeks of his end of life, we had him at home in the family environment, and we all battened down the hatches. And I think what's really interesting in preparing for today is the government has identified 4 major conditions: cancer, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory disease. And of all of those 4 conditions, people with cancer are more likely to die at home out of any of those other groups. And there's also been a spike looking at the latest data as well. So the pandemic has had an impact on where people are choosing to die. And I think because of the pandemic, we're probably now more equipped as a nation, but also in terms of employment and organisations as well, we are more acclimatised to supporting people in the home environment, whether that's at work or whether it's something like supporting dying relatives. So we did die at home, and ultimately, what that meant for me was I think I span a bit too many plates for a little bit too long. And, contrary to popular belief, I am human. And yeah, I wasn't Superwoman in the end. And essentially, that resulted in a short-term leave of absence, period of ill health. And I had to put the brakes on the PhD study for 12 months until I could pick the pieces back up again. So in reality, there was a period of recovery. So when we think about a person who's caring for a relative who's dying, we'll often think about the point of death as being the end of that process. And I think what's really important to recognise is there's often an elongated period of recovery which follows this, and it will be different for different people. So I did manage to resume work at the start of 2018, and I picked up PhD study again later in that year. Finally got that beast of a PhD submitted into the back end of 2019, and just got the PhD Viva done 2 weeks before the world closed for the pandemic, and the pandemic came creeping in. So just managed to get that Viva completed in time. And then this is when the world changed for everybody, to be fair. I don't think there was anybody who wasn't touched by the pandemic. And this is when parent and carer networks were formed all over the UK. It's when we all galvanised together, we all started to look after each other, and we had some really tight communities of practice. And this is when Mark and myself started to work together to try and support each other, but also to try and support colleagues and students as well across the piece. Fanfare moments. PhD passed finally in 21. Um, and then, without realizing it, I think I'd become an advocate and shifted into that advocacy space. So we launched in our departments equality, diversity, inclusion champions, and I was the one for parent and carer for that department. And then also working with Mark was the department facilitator for the parent carer network across the university. So we didn't just leave things as they were. At the end of the pandemic, we recognised there was a great need of support, and that support needed to continue for people with children or who were carers as well. Got to get this little bit of success in, Mark. I hope you appreciate this. So we got a little bit of funding as well in 23, and we launched some social chats. So it's about keeping that momentum going and where we can support people. And the role that I'm in now is very much about enhancing student experience. So I've got the opportunity to support parents and carers in this role, but also for those of us in higher education, it's thinking about the role of access and participation plans as well, and how we can continue to support parents and carers through that route also. So I think one of the things that I wanted to share really was, for me, I think when you're in the middle of dealing with essentially the worst thing that's happened in your life, and when you're spinning all of those plates, I think what's particularly useful is to have a frame of reference, because I've never gone through this before. It was all new, the context, and it was so multifaceted. There were so many plates I was spinning, and I think having something to benchmark against can be quite useful. And I think this is what the Kubler-Ross model does. It helps you to recognise how you're feeling, why you're feeling that way, and that actually this is a normalized process. This is your way of managing these extreme circumstances. And I'd like to say that this is the trajectory that I followed, but unfortunately it looks nothing like that. This is actually what mine. So what you can see here is I jumped straight into nurse mode. Okay, yeah, that's great. That's problem solved. What are we going to do? Let's get the cape on. I stopped at wearing underwear on the outside of tights. I didn't go that far. But it was a case of very much dealing with the situation, being really high functioning, keeping those plates going. I'm an academic, I'm a mother, I'm a student, doing all of these things. And actually, for me, because it was so high functioning, kind of fell off a cliff face. So what you can see happening here is there is that metaphorical cliff face that essentially I fell off, which you can see quite clearly on the model here, the change curve. And then moving in, this was the period of recovery that I had to move through before I could get to the point of recovery and before I could get to the point of being an advocate and being in a position where I was strong enough to talk about this with you today and go through this with you all. So I just wanted to share that and really highlight that this is not a linear model. And we speak to this a lot and say it's not linear, but from my lived experience, it definitely wasn't. And I missed the first bit out immediately because there were too many things to do and it was too important for me to kind of fall in to that midsection of depression. Had to keep all these plates spinning. But thinking I could avoid that and stay superwoman, that didn't work, unfortunately. So, I am human, like the best of us. And I think what's been really beneficial for me in preparing to talk to you all today is that hindsight that comes with reflection, in being able to look back on the journey that I went through. And actually, I missed a lot of tricks. I'll be honest, I missed a lot of tricks. There were a lot of other areas of support I could have explored. I didn't know about them, or they were pre-pandemic and they weren't actually as refined as they are now. And I think the pandemic's been quite a driving force for us in terms of some of the things you can see there on the screen. So with flexible working arrangements, for people who are struggling, we are entitled to request changes in working patterns. It's a very reasonable thing to request, and from a legislative point of view, it's a statutory right that we actually have to look at flexible working arrangements. Paid and unpaid leave. Whilst I accessed compassionate leave, a lot of it, I just kept moving things around like Tetris and just creating space. So I'd work until 1 o'clock in the morning. I would drive dad to hospital, for an hour in the morning. So it was moving jigsaw pieces. And this isn't actually something really that I did look into. And perhaps I would now, the beauty of hindsight. I may look at emergency leave, I may look at carers leave. There would be other, I think, areas that I would move to look at in terms of organisational support. Something as well, I think, which has really risen out of the pandemic is most employers now, certainly in higher education, have external companies who are offering impartial guidance, and that guidance can be, and often is, for non-work related topics, can be for finances, can be for bereavement, can be for all sorts of areas. So again, this is often an underutilized service, I think, that universities provide for us, and something really that we should be utilizing as an additional layer of support. And also making sure that the policies that we have within the university environments are fit for purpose and do support the staff and recognise that, staff, they have lives, they have multiple identities. And in order for people to do their jobs to the best of their ability, they do need to be supported. They need to rest. They need to be given optimal circumstances to work within. So the policies are something that I certainly wasn't familiar with, particularly in terms of well-being. And one of the areas I've moved to, I think, retrospectively, is managerial support. So as a manager, do I know what policies exist in my organisation so I can effectively look after people that I line manage? And currently, I'm quite new to this organisation. The answer right now would be no, I don't. I'm not as familiar as I probably need to be. So I think it's also what can we do in the roles that we have. So if we're supporting students, do we understand how we can support students in terms of policies and procedures? If we're supporting staff as line managers, etc. So I think my manager and the leaders around me were incredibly supportive, and it just would have made life so much harder for me. So the role of the manager really can't be overlooked. And I think if we shine a light on UK legislation as well, it's really worthwhile becoming familiar with the rights that we have as individuals, whether that's our employment rights, whether that's not being discriminated against because we are parents, because of these roles that we actually have, these caring roles that we have, our right to flexible working as well. And in addition to that, and I wasn't familiar with the Carers Leave Act, I'll be honest, and I didn't know this had come into effect last year. So this was good for me to find out that should I find myself in this situation again, I'm entitled to 1 week unpaid carers leave in a 12-month period. I wasn't aware that that had actually come in. So I think it's about raising our awareness as we go through and, making sure we support each other. So I think just as I'm moving towards the end now of the talk, it's really thinking about where we can support students as well as each other as staff members, and the role that the Office for Students presents to us with access and participation plans. And very much if we think about the socio-economic connection between those in deprived areas, and we think about the connection to health and all of those complex health problems that make it more likely that somebody will get cancer, this is a really important area of work going forward, that we must be supporting students from disadvantaged backgrounds and from the vantage point of any care and parental responsibilities that they may have. So there's opportunity for us to use these mechanisms going through. And I think just a final point of reflection really about the role of parent and carer networks. They align to so many strands. They align to equality, diversity, and inclusion. They align to things like Athena Swan. They align to well-being. They align to all the legislative strands. But in my experience, and I know in Mark and Anna's previous research as well, they've lifted the lid on how a lot of the time these networks are what we would consider to be grassroots. So they are formed by staff for staff rather than being convened by organisations and being convened by human resource departments and teams. So I think it's an important moment in time now. We are out of the pandemic, we've come out of the other side. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we maintain that momentum going forward so that we can continue to support people. We can continue to make sure there's equity for all staff members, irrespective, and students, irrespective of what they're actually going through. But an observation from my perspective is, as long as we need parent and carer networks, there's not enough support inside of an organisation. And for me, the fact that we need parent carer networks means there's an awful lot of work to do. And I genuinely applaud your group and the efforts that you're all making to pull together and continue to improve this for parents and carers. And I suppose it's just thrown it back across to yourselves now, and the overarching question, in the roles that we assume, how can we support people as they care for others? And I just want to leave you with that question as we move towards questions and answers. And just to land on a quote which resonates somewhat. So from caring comes courage. And that is how it's possible to spin plates, to keep going, to overcome adversity, and to come out of the other side of the journey of the worst moment of your life, and how you can feed forward and help others. So thank you for letting me share my journey with you all. I hope it's resonated on some level, and thank you for being the first large audience that I've actually presented to on a very personal and very important topic. I'll hand back to Mark now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikki. It's just a lot of love and respect for you to have shared something so personal, and really value the time and effort you've gone to talk about something that is, I'm sure everyone on the call can recognise how it can be a great challenge to talk about things like this. So I really, really appreciate that. At this point, shall we open the floor? Would anyone like to have any comments or any questions you'd like to ask? Obviously, the question that Vikki has kindly posed to us, the idea of how can we support others who have caring responsibilities, or what can we do? We've got a really nice sense of what organisations can do. Is there anything we can do as well? If anyone wants to put a hand up or put a chat comment on, please do that. I would just like to highlight, while you're thinking, I really valued when you were putting in the Kubler-Ross, because it's funny, I've been looking for a completely different thing. I've been looking at that this week, and how much it's it's not a one size fits all. That's
Mm.
I think that was a really valuable thing to highlight and to show your trajectory and the cliff edge. And I think it's such a powerful visual to show how that it can be quite an abrupt moment of collapse almost. So I think really valued you sharing that, Vikki. I think it was really powerful to see that. And something that probably would be reassuring for others. That I'm not at that stage. I'm completely different. It's not been like that for me. Does anyone have any comments that they would like to make, or any questions you'd like to raise? Claire, please.
Thank you, Vikki. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing. To start with, I don't really have a question, but I guess your points on the line manager's role towards the end. Yeah, I think like what you said, it can't be understated. It's so important to. So I think you said you had really supportive line managers. Yes, I'm just thinking like from my experiences, like a couple of different situations. And I think that work context and being able to give yourself permission to take that time or whatever you needs, yeah, that line manager's got a key role in that. And then also, I'm thinking like whether you'll even have a conversation with the line manager as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of kind of culture piece around it, I think. So yeah, I didn't really have a question. It's just kind of like
No, it's
that was what
lovely.
really stood
Thank
out
you,
for me.
Claire. And
And
I think that's what it does, doesn't it? You know, when we bring conversations like this to the table, it often presents us with different lenses that we've possibly not looked through before. And in terms of going through a situation like this, you know, I can't even begin to imagine how hard it would have been had I not have had the psychological safety to actually reach out to the team. No doubt helped by the fact that we're all in health and social care. So, you know, this was often the bread and butter for most of us. But the line manager role and, you know, your colleague's role as well, which is so crucial to have that support to be able to manage a role like this. But even as a line manager myself now, I'm currently ill-equipped to actually support others until I have that really robust understanding. So where's our training as line managers? What training do we have? Which, you know, for example, how do you support a person who has just become a parent? How do you support somebody whose relative is dying? And in my mind, that training isn't quite there yet. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, for us to make a difference and to continue to improve this for people. Shall I go to Marie? I think Marie, you were next. I think Mark may have frozen. He's looking very quizzical.
We could be twins, except throw in a child with additional needs. I went through the same story as you, but a few years before. And it's really interesting. I think my question for you, for anybody actually, is that although we have flexible working policies and periods of unpaid leave for caring, etc., quite often people that I am supporting or that are part of our network do not have the opportunity to have flexible working conditions because of the role that they have.
Yeah.
So where somebody can, because of the role that they have, if they're teaching or research or whatever, that's much easier to do. But our parent and carers network obviously goes for the professional services staff, porters, admin staff, all those sorts of things who are public facing, me included, where I need to be in an office. I can't work from home. Or have limited capacity to do that. We can't change our working hours because we've got members of the public coming in and out, or student support, or whatever it happens to be. And I think then that's where the system lets everybody down, because it's not a case of finding an alternative role. It's give up your role and apply for something else. And I think that for me, that's the most common thing that I see, is that in an ideal world, it would be nice if alternative roles could be found for those people, and that it's not just a case of taking a complete break or giving up that role, or you've got no option but to take extended sick leave to try and figure out life in that period of time where life is still stressful. And as you're saying, we don't all go along this sort of same path. So any advice for those members of staff who find themselves in that position where actually, yes, they can request flexible working, but it doesn't really work for the role that they're in, or it's denied? Because you can request, it doesn't mean that you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And find themselves in that really difficult position, especially if they're on a career trajectory as well, where actually all of a sudden that end goal may be taken away from them.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Marie, and I think this is why on reflection, looking back, there were elements where, for me personally, the support that I got was completely invaluable, and I can only imagine how challenging it would be for people who didn't have that. But I think in preparing for today, there's lots of rights and options and policies that I just wasn't aware of, and lots of things inside of the organization which actually, had I have had the bandwidth, which I didn't have, really didn't have it, had I have had the bandwidth to have been a little bit more informed about this, or had an understanding of exactly what my rights were inside of the organization, then there were additional layers of support. So I did as much as I could in the moment that I had. I dropped to part-time working and dropped out of, so when I had my second baby, I couldn't be a student for that period in time. So I took, 12 months out. I took another 12 months out after Dad died. And I do say that I had 3 Bs. I had a baby, a bereavement, and a breakdown, all in the middle of my PhD. And I had managerial support, and I had the option to an extent to manage my diary if I wasn't actually in teaching students, for example. So could that have been avoided if I'd actually had that information, if I had fully utilized everything that was available? And I think it's about and this is probably where the role of parent carer networks really come into play, in terms of pushing that agenda, in being an advocate for people. And then, to me, this is how I see the grassroots element of parent carer networks really come into play, and working with managers and working with HR and working with senior leaders and explaining the needs for people, because we did that in the pandemic. We had to find new ways of working when we weren't allowed onto the premises. So to me, this is how I see the role of UK PACT going forward. This might be something to consider, how you support people who don't have the luxury of adjusting their working hours. It's a big challenge. It's a big tricky challenge. But I think being informed, and also working closely on that narrative and raising awareness and pushing for change is the way. That's the space that I see this moving into.
I think it's because in education in particular, we don't have that opportunity always to go sideways or to do something slightly different. Whereas in private companies or in business, that we do have those opportunities. Even in the NHS, actually, where I'm clinical background, same as you, we would have had more opportunity to move. In education, that seems very difficult to do.
It is harder to do.
It is much harder, and I think that as a group, that is one area I think that would be really good to try and explore and advocate, because it seems particularly difficult in education.
And it's not undervaluing the peer support you get as well from that community of practice, which can just be enough to keep you going.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've taken up loads of your time.
Marie. Thank you. That's okay. Shall we go to June?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say actually something that might bridge that gap a little bit for managers and for the employee is, I know there's, for instance, when you go to the doctors, there's a disability passport where, all that's got like conditions of your child that may be struggling with, and that then passport can go to many different doctors or consultants for them to understand, how to support that child, maybe in an appointment or anywhere else. I think it could also help in terms of, if you're caring for someone, so you could have like a carer's passport, that then could also help the line manager and the employee, for instance. And it can be updated regularly. You could also then, identify areas where that staff member may need further advice and support, and also for that staff member to let their line manager know what they're actually struggling with, how that caring affects their life. And I think that's something that could really work basically. I know obviously line managers have got a lot of work to do. They also have a lot of other policies and, you know, things they have to remember. There's a vast amount of, you know, information. It's a lot for managers, I think. But you know, there should be more training in place for that. But yeah, I just wanted to add that I think, you know, carer's passport is a good way to go down, and to let your line manager know what difficulties you face. So whether that's whether your carers don't, you know, turn up on time, and then that delays you, so you're not necessarily late for work, but this is obviously a regular thing that happens, doesn't it? Yeah, I do feel that that's probably one way where it could help bridge that gap a little bit. I do have to go now, actually, because I've got another meeting, but thank you very much, Vikki, for sharing your experience.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, June.
I think
that's
great,
it's really interesting, isn't it, Mark? Sorry, I can't see you at the moment. This is why I'm accidentally talking over you.
No, don't worry. I was going to say, before we get to end of time, I wanted to just let Viv have her question, but I did want to say we have been discussing that on our email distribution list, the carers passports. I know Newcastle University have that, and I think others may well benefit from following that, but that is those of you who are on that distribution list can benefit from. There's a template on the government for the carers passport that you can propose to your organisation. But Viv,
sounds
please.
amazing. Sounds amazing. Viv?
If you're still there.
Hi there. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you to Vikki for sharing. That was very timely. Yeah, just wanted to quickly add on that I think the carer's passport in the workplace is a brilliant idea. That sounds really good. My experience, I was extremely fortunate to have very, very understanding managers, not be sort of student facing. We're in professional services, but not student facing. I had the luxury of it being at a time of year where actually I could say what I would like to do is just not be sort of facing with other team members at the moment. And I had a project that I could just work on sort of quietly in the background, which just helped me enormously. I was a carer for 2 years, very intensively, for 2 parents, and bereaved of both within 18 months, just up till recently. Yeah, initially the thing I sort of wanted to suss out with work was about the potential for a sabbatical, as not paid, but an unpaid sabbatical, or some kind of extended period of leave, because I knew with dementia and cancer, this could be a very long trajectory, and I didn't know how I was going to manage that, you know, and at one point just thought about leaving the job entirely. I was already part-time, so that was good, and then reduced hours at a crucial time, and then gradually built back up. So I had a lot of very good understanding, but actually HR policy didn't support that well in terms of any conversation, particularly about a sabbatical or how to manage things longer term. It's all very, you know, it's all worded to 1 week, 5 days. You don't know when that's going to happen. I ran out of all of that leave. I had it back to back over Christmas and January. And if things had gone on longer, I would be working unpaid, you know, I'd have to just take unpaid leave for quite a long time. So I think it is certainly growing, and especially with the likes of dementia. Yeah, there's a huge scope there for all sorts of institutions to learn of how to support people, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Viv. I think that's a really valuable contribution. I think just the idea of it, a week being enough is, yeah, it's just, it doesn't make any sense really. But yeah, I think our job to try and raise awareness, as Vikki said, I think that's a really important task. Yes, there is for distribution list. If you pop your name in the chat, I've got your name now, Stephanie, so I can add you to the distribution list, and we can do that. I think we're just conscious of time, and I know we're all busy, so I know I've wanted to give you an opportunity to say anything at the end. I know because you are a carer as well. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
Just to add very briefly to the conversation about carers passports, as you said, Mark, we do have a carers passport at Newcastle, and it seems to work really well. And I think what it works really well for is for you to have that conversation with your line manager, and fingers crossed they are supportive, but then when line managers change and you have a new one and you don't know how supportive or unsupportive they're going to be, that conversation doesn't start from scratch, doesn't start from zero, because there's something in the document, there's something in the passport. So for me, that's the beauty of the passport. And thank you, Vikki, for an amazing presentation. And thank you all for coming and for giving us your ideas for future sessions and ways to organize the workshop, the network.
Thank you. Vikki, is there anything you'd like to leave us with before we get no pressure? Just the final say.
Just a big thank you to everyone for joining me, because it's a very challenging space that we find ourselves in if we do actually end up having to care for a relative who's dying, and it can be quite a lonely journey, and not necessarily one that's particularly well signposted. I was never given a manual, and I was a critical care nurse and still didn't know how to navigate the landscape. So I think it's thanks to people like all of you on the call who strongly advocate for parents and carers, and that work is often unrecognised but absolutely crucial and very highly valued by those who need it. So I suppose a big thank you to all of you for continuing to advocate for parents and carers, because when everyone's chips are down, we need to pull in as a tight community of practice, and without everybody who's on the call today, we wouldn't be looking after each other, and we wouldn't have improvements like carers passports being brought into play. So thank you for your time. It's lovely to meet you all, and no doubt we'll meet again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vikki. That's great. I will stop recording now.